Hey there, that's George.
And that's Jake.
And these are guitars. Today we'll be taking a look at what is arguably the most iconic Coheed and Cambria song, Welcome Home. I first heard this song on Rock Band, and it was my first step into Coheed and Cambria's catalog. This is a particularly emotive tune of tumultuous love, and its lyrical themes are matched by its dark atmosphere. Claudio Sanchez, the main brain behind Coheed and Cambria, has noted that this song has a mixture of Tool and Led Zeppelin vibes, and I couldn't agree more with that statement.
Tuning for this song is a half step down from standard, or E-flat standard. It stays in 4/4 time throughout and sits mostly around the key of E-flat minor.
The opening riff has this weird up-tempo Irish folk feel, or something, I don't know. It just really reminds me of Potatoes. Let's take a look at the riff slowed down, and then we'll break it down a bit. This is a fairly simple lick based around the E-flat minor scale, characterized by a quick rake at the beginning and a bouncy rhythm. And while I say simple, it's actually deceptively difficult, and I have bailed on this at least once live before, so don't sleep on it. He was there.
This is true.
It's easy to get tripped up when the riff turns back around, and it's very important to make sure that the rake at the beginning is clear and articulate. This riff is rounded off by some diatonic thirds, which give you a little bit more flavor and context than your simple power chord. After the riff repeats, the band joins in, the distortion kicks on, and we don't have to deal with that stupid rake anymore. Instead, now we have a variation of the intro riff without the rake and with 100% more pinch harmonics. Here's a quick demo.
When the full band enters, the second guitar lands hard on an E-flat 5 chord. Welcome home! The second rhythm guitar part continues to hit home the key of E-flat minor, with a walk down of F, E-flat, and D dyads consisting of diatonic thirds. For a little spice, when we land back on the E-flat 5 chord, there's a trill between the B-flat and the open A-flat string.
The rest of the intro trades off this riff with another based around a B-flat power chord. It also contains a menacing walk up from and back down to the E-flat, which sets up the following verse section of the song. Here's the second piece of the intro section. This brings us to the verse, still centered on E-flat minor. I think this is where the Zeppelin influence really starts to shine through, particularly calling back to their song Kashmir. The rhythm is slightly different, but just as massive and memorable.
When Welcome Home first came out back in 2005, I was actually just learning to play the guitar. I remember hearing this song for the first time and immediately wanting to learn how to play it. Unfortunately, I was pretty unsuccessful. One thing that I was able to take away from the song was the use of voice leading and two-note chords, or dyads. As a beginner, these concepts were new to me. I was well versed in the idea of moving a power chord around the fretboard to create a chord progression, but with the help of Welcome Home, I learned that you can create a chord progression just by moving one or two notes around your power chord. With this technique, you're creating chord movement by using inversions of the other chords in your progression. This also creates what is known as voice leading. Voice leading refers to the way individual notes move from chord to chord. Often, the most pleasing voice leading occurs when all individual voices move smoothly from chord to chord. One way to achieve good voice leading is to make sure you're using small movements between chords as opposed to large leaps. Let's take a look at the verse section without voice leading, using only power chords. As you can hear, the result is pretty choppy and it doesn't provide a lot of harmonic color. Of course, there's a time and place for this style, but by adding inversions and using the thirds in our chord, we can create smoother lines between our chords and add a little bit more harmonic interest. So the two examples that we just played are the same chord progression, but as you can hear, they sound vastly different. One isn't necessarily right and the other is wrong. It just depends on what kind of style and sound you're going for.
Next up is the chorus section, where Coheed finally ventures away from the familiar E-flat minor feel. Taking a look at the chord progression, you'll see what should be some pretty familiar shapes. Here are those chord shapes isolated. My good friend and mentor Paul Todoroff refers to these kinds of chords as cowboy chords. But don't let the nickname fool you, they actually do apply to hard rock and metal, and quite well. Upon inspection, you should recognize the traditional F major, A minor, and C major chord shapes. Keep in mind that since we are tuned a half step down, the value of each chord should also be reduced by a half step. This should immediately make you cringe, as we are faced with an F flat and a C flat, two notes that theoretically shouldn't exist. However, the presence of both is actually a very solid hint at something very cool happening here, a modulation from E flat minor to C flat major. Another hint towards this modulation is the chord progression itself. Saying that we are in C flat major, and C flat is the root or the 1 of the key, that would make F flat the 4, and then A flat the 6 of the key. The 4-6-1 chord progression is quite common in music, and putting all this together is how we decided that this does, in fact, modulate to C flat major. At this point, the verse repeats and is followed up by another chorus, leading into a nice build-up towards the solo section. The rhythm is similar, but displaced from the verse riff, and this riff is centered again on the F-flat power chord. Here's a quick demo of the rhythm part of the bridge, a very nice little calm before the storm, and a good place for me to catch my breath before I have to play the solos.
This pre-solo section in the second rhythm guitar makes use of pedal notes, alternating between root and third and fifth of the chords over the underlying chord progression. There are a few different ways to play this section on the fretboard. I choose a method that involves a little bit wider stretches, but it allows me to keep my left hand anchored on the fretboard throughout each measure. After this pre-solo section, we arrive at the first guitar solo. The first solo utilizes the notes of the minor pentatonic scale. It starts off with a variation of a pretty classic minor pentatonic lick, and is followed by some whole step bends, descending sequences, chromatic passing notes, and a hammer-on to end the section.
The second solo is characterized by some wild bends and sporadic phrasing. I broke it up into two parts to make it a little easier to digest, so here it is slowed down.
The third solo section makes heavy use of the natural minor scale, more whole step bends, hammer-ons and pull-offs, unison notes, and a lick that slides its way up the fretboard.
The fourth solo is a little bit darker, littered with pinch harmonics and chromatic passing tones. It's rounded off by a pretty cool lick that takes notes from the pentatonic scale and plays them a little bit more unconventionally. Here's the whole fourth solo slowed down.
final solo uses more hammer-ons, pulling off to the open strings, still using the natural minor scale.
To close out the song, the verse riff continues after the solo section, and Coheed draws more parallels to Zeppelin with a huge orchestrated outro. A choir holds down an epic melody in the background, accented by the lead guitar part, and then fades off into nothing. Here's the final example today, the lead line played by Claudio to end the song.
So the main takeaways that we got from this song are ways to spice up your chord progressions using dyads and voice leading. C-flat major is a nightmare to analyze. You can add variation to your songs simply by modulating to a closely related key for your chorus. And don't be afraid to have 5 guitar solos in your song.
Hey, thanks for checking out this week's video, and we hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned something in the process. If you haven't already, make sure to drop us a like and subscribe, and check back next Friday for new content. See you. This is a particular, unique New York. How now, brown cow. This is a particularly emotive tune of tumultuous. Bro, this is not gonna work. This is a really sad song, and it sounds sad. It just really reminds me of potatoes. And potatoes.
The second...
Yep, cowboy chords. Potatoes.